follow-up in, George, and the follow-up doesn't come. But give us the number one question that you would have asked if you had the opportunity of Comey.
Well, number one question is, did the FBI do any due diligence on the person who had hired Christopher Steele? This was the author of the dossier. Fusion GPS was his taskmaster. This is an organization that exists to smear the reputations of political opponents. Did you look into them? Did you know this history? And did that not color your view of the source who was bringing you this information? Did you not care that it was the Clinton campaign and the DNC that had paid for what was essentially opposition research?
Well, and speaking of Oppo research, Comey was asked by Stephanopoulos about why he didn't tell the president about who funded that Steele dossier. Let's watch.
Did you tell him that the Steele dossier had been financed by his political opponents?
No, I didn't even think I used the term Steele dossier. I just talked about additional material.
But did he have a right to know that?
That had been financed by his political opponents? I don't know the answer to that. It wasn't necessary for my goal, which was to alert him that we had this information.
My goal, which was to rattle the president-elect and get him really freaked out about it. I found that answer to be despicable, frankly, despicable. Kim.
Yeah. It says everything about this. Look, if you actually read the full transcript, Comey admits that he claims that he knew that the dossier had been funded by a Democrat-aligned group, but that he didn't know which one. Well, another question, why on earth did you not? Here comes this man bringing this dossier full of salacious allegations. I understand he had a track record with the FBI, that he'd worked with it before, but never for a political operative before, never in an election year. Did you not say who is paying this guy and what is his purpose out there? And he continued to refer throughout his entire interview as Christopher Steele as a credible source, when the FBI now knows that he was out, despite FBI orders, talking to the press, blowing their probe, giving out information he'd been specifically told not to, and Comey still referred to him as a credible source. There were a million questions that should have been asked about that.
And there were two people whose names didn't seem to come up often. If they did, I must have missed them. Page and Strzok. Lisa Page and Peter Strzok, FBI agents who worked both investigations, lovebirds, texting each other, insurance policy. What questions should have been asked?
Oh, basic ones. For instance, is this the kind of behavior that the FBI thinks is appropriate? Is it common behavior to have people sending messages like this? Does it concern you about the political bias? Both of these people were very senior members of the probes into both Clinton and into Trump. And does Comey have any concerns knowing what they texted to each other? For instance, once they had a conversation about how they shouldn't necessarily send too many agents on to deal with Hillary Clinton, because, by the way, she might be the next president, and ooh, that could be bad. So political decisions were influencing how they handled those probes. Comey should have been asked if he still had confidence in the integrity, knowing what he knows now about how the two were conversing about it.
And views on lying, we only have about 20 seconds here, but views on lying and the IG report on McCabe, we have about 15 seconds.
Yeah, basic one. Comey spent half of that interview talking about how you should not lie to the FBI. Basic question, should McCabe be prosecuted? Because the IG said that he lied repeatedly under oath to the FBI.
Kim Strassel, fantastic piece and great questions. We only wish they had been asked. Stay there. We'll be right back.
I buy the same old yellow box for hemorrhoids. Recticare Complete Hemorrhoid Care System has 2 effective medications. The strongest OTC concentration of lidocaine to relieve pain and itch, plus phenylephrine HCl to reduce swelling. Get more complete hemorrhoid relief with Recticare Complete.
Hello, I'm Mike Lindell, inventor of MyPillow. Thanks to your support, you've helped make MyPillow become one of the fastest growing companies in America. Over the last 12 years, you've helped MyPillow create thousands of jobs right here in the USA.
When I got MyPillow, I'm
out of California on immigration and breaking details on the horrifying in-air emergency that led to the first U.S. airline fatality in almost a decade. But first, our live coverage of the passing of former First Lady Barbara Bush continues. We've heard from presidents and first ladies from across the political divide. The Trumps declaring Barbara Bush will be remembered for her devotion to country and family. The Obamas noting she was the rock of a family dedicated to public service. And the Clintons saying simply she was fierce and feisty, but still full of grit and grace. But what struck me was a reaction from a basketball great named Bill Russell, a five-time most valuable player in the NBA, who helped the Boston Celtics win 11 championships. He tweeted that years ago at an event, Barbara Bush walked up to this giant athlete and said, "I want to introduce myself." Russell laughed and said to the former First Lady, "Oh, I know who you are." That always stuck with me, he recalled, and I thought it was nice of her. Joining me now with their reflections, the chief political anchor, Bret Baier, and Fox News senior political analyst, Brit Hume. Britt, I want to start with you because I've heard these stories about how White House correspondents in your day used to go to Kennebunkport to the family compound, and you would find the president in the backyard at the grill flipping the burgers, maybe drinking beer out of a can. And this couple that was known as being very powerful, very rich, also seemed very approachable.
They certainly did, and you know, it's customary and had been for many years for presidents on vacation to throw a little party for the press that have to cover them on these trips. And family could come and kids could come if they were there, and it was a very nice event, and the Bushes always did it in a very friendly and gracious way, and Mrs. Bush was especially gracious at those events, although you always sense with Barbara Bush that while she was sympathetic and she was well-meaning and she was friendly and she was full of hospitality, that you know, if your shirt tail was untucked or you know you looked sloppy, that she would not fail to notice.
Yes, absolutely.
So all of us, I think, who ever attended any of those events hosted by the Bushes were always aware that somebody was on patrol. She always was. We never felt that she was being horribly judgmental, but we knew to be in our best behavior.
Brett, we met each other covering the second President Bush, and we've had this great fortune and honor to cover these powerful people, many times men. But this was a woman who was formidable in her own right.
Yeah, she clearly was the matriarch, and they will say, anybody in that family, that she laid down the law. And Britt's right. I mean, she had warmth and wit, but she had, you know, a sharp tongue, and you knew where she stood on a lot of issues. I think what was striking was the love affair between Barbara Bush and H.W. Bush. And she would say that I married the first man I ever kissed. And she said, when I tell that to my children, they just about throw up. She had a lot of humor. On this day, it's important to remember that President 41, H.W. Bush, held her hand all day. According to staff, he was there throughout the day and was there when she passed. They are calling it he's being stoic and strong, lifted up by a large and supportive family. But obviously, this is saying goodbye to the love of his life, 73 years. They celebrated 72 years of marriage January 6th, and there was nothing like that couple.
Britt, you certainly saw the couple up close, and Brett's referring to the statement we've just seen from Gene Becker, the longtime chief of staff to Bush 41, as he's known, of course. You've known him so long. It's obviously impossible to get inside his head right now, but this obviously has to be heartbreaking for him.
Of course it does, because their marriage was so solid, so enduring. The family was such really a success. I mean, they had one tragedy when their little girl died at the age of 3. But we know who all the other members of the family were. They've all done well and prospered. One, of course, became himself president and served 2 terms. We know of Governor Jeb Bush, son Neil. Dorothy was a tremendous success. Marvin Bush, a man we all know around Washington as a terrific success in business. And these people were close to one another. They were close to her. Their admiration for their parents was palpable when you saw them all together. Sure, there was this fair amount of towel snapping and teasing and some friendly competition, but this was an unusually close family, and they set a kind of an example for the country of family life, family values, a family we could all look up to and admire and sympathize with. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that our hearts go out to all of them tonight, but especially, of course, for President George H.W. Bush, who, as Brett pointed out so rightly, has lost the love of his life tonight at a late stage in his own life when he himself has had plenty of health challenges. So our prayers are with him for sure.
Brett, a retired Secret Service agent who guarded the vice president's residence here in Washington back in the 80s, told me a story about a young George W. Bush coming home late one night, and he's sort of stumbling, and it's 2 in the morning, and he's about to go in, and this agent says to him, "You might want to be careful. Your mom was looking for you a little while ago, and they're upstairs sleeping." And W basically used salty language to say, "Mind your business." And he gets out of the way, and basically W opens the door, makes all this noise. All the lights come on. Mrs. Bush comes running down, and not only yells at him for being out late, but this agent told me, he said, "You go apologize to that agent. You need to be more polite." And he came out and said, "My mom said I need to apologize to you." I think it probably says a lot about a young George W. Bush. But as you said, she laid down the law. She was polite. She was powerful, but she treated everybody pretty well.
I said this on Laura's show, but you know, the Secret Service put out a statement, and they had a real love for H.W. and Barbara Bush. The people who worked for the Bushes really expressed that, and I said her code name was Tranquility with the Secret Service. But George W. Bush used to say that he had his father's eyes but his mother's mouth, and they knew that the language was always, she was going to come back with a quip. I will say this, she wrote a lengthy letter to her children that she never sent, but she published in her memoir, in which she advised them. She said, "For heaven's sake, enjoy life. Don't cry over things that were or things that aren't. Enjoy what you have now to the fullest. In all honesty, you really only have 2 choices. You can like what you do or you can dislike it. I choose to like it, and what fun I've had." And she said on her 90th birthday that she's the luckiest woman in the world, truthfully, and she knew it. So she lived a life, a full life, one that dealt really a lot with her family and H.W. Bush, obviously.
And Britt, she had to sort of be second fiddle sometimes, obviously, to a president of the United States, and then mother of a second president. And I was reading something where when her husband was running for president in the 80s, she was asked by Jane Pauley on the Today Show, "It seems like he's a man of the 80s and you're a woman of the 40s." And she sort of laughed it off, but said later she felt like crying.
Well, she would never do that, though, of course, would she? With all her dignity and strength. And it was kind of an absurd comment by Jane Pauley, because those two people were of a certain generation. And if you want to call it the 40s, that I wouldn't object to that, and they probably wouldn't either. But the example that they had of a certain set of values and a certain code of conduct was something I think that we all could admire, and millions did.
And Brett, I was struck that today, after she had said, "I just want comfort care, I don't want medical care anymore," she had the family around her, and we were told that she was enjoying some bourbon.
Yeah, she was telling stories really up until the end, we're told, and she had some bourbon, and you can imagine that scene. I think it's also powerful that we know that the family put that out, that she chose to not continue medical care and chose to be with her family, as they said, in comfort care or in hospice. And you know, I think it's important for families who have to go through that choice to look at this family and how they did it.
Britt, do you have a final thought? Because, you know, first ladies always pick issues that are important to them. Sometimes it matters more than for others. Nancy Reagan would just say no. Mrs. Bush was all about literacy, and it seemed like it really
was,
did.
And yeah, and in fact, the last time one of the last times I saw her was a year ago, last December, when I went over to the Bush Library to MC part of the Pearl Harbor commemorations. And the first night I was there, she was not. President Bush 41 hosted a little dinner for the people who were participating in the event. She wasn't there. The reason she wasn't there was that she was off involved in a literacy event with son Neil. So that spoke to her commitment to that cause, which she never wavered on. But I would simply say, you know, my final thought about her is the example she set as a mother and as a first lady will be what I think she's remembered by. The woman they called the Silver Fox was someone that we all, I think, looked up to and thought was an exemplar, and she certainly was.
Absolutely. Brett, last word.
She gave a commencement address in which she said, "I chose literacy because I honestly believe that if more people could read, write, and comprehend, we would be that much closer to solving so many of the problems plaguing our society." She was about solving problems. She was about privacy, though, too, and being with her family. And, you know, this end is kind of a sweet but bitter end for a nation, and obviously as the Bushes continue to mourn her loss.
Brett, we really appreciate your reflections tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, flags are at half-staff at the Bush Library. These are live pictures right now from Houston. For more on the former First Lady, Casey Stegall is standing by there outside the Bush family neighborhood in Houston. Good evening, Casey.
And good evening, and we have seen quite a bit of crowds showing up here, neighbors, people from the public that have been dropping by to leave flowers and show their signs of support once news broke this evening. They've been asking the press a lot of questions, but we frankly haven't seen any real activity in and out of that black iron gate back there, the entrance to the exclusive neighborhood where Mrs. Bush passed away inside of her home earlier. A spokesperson, as you all were just saying, for the president said that he did, in fact, hold her hand all day, and he was at her side when she, quote, left this good earth. It goes on to say that Mr. Bush is, of course, brokenhearted, but is also being, quote, stoic and strong, being lifted up by his large and supportive family. And speaking of that family, tonight, one of her sons, former President George W. Bush, had this to say in a statement. It reads in part, "Mom kept us on our toes and kept us laughing until the end. I'm a lucky man that Barbara Bush was my mother. Our family will miss her dearly, and we thank you all for your prayers and good wishes." One of her grandsons, George P. Bush, land commissioner here in the state of Texas, writing, "My grandmother didn't just live life, she lived it well. And the sorrow of her loss is softened by the knowledge of her impact on our family and our country." Tonight, flags lowered to half-staff, as you said, Ed, outside the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library and Museum in College Station, Texas, and across the country, as ordered by President Trump in an honor of respect. Now, the former First Lady will be laid to rest next to the daughter that she and George lost to leukemia at age 3, Robin, and it is ultimately going to be the resting place of President Bush himself there at the library. Here is some reaction from well-wishers there tonight.
Her activism that just continued on way past her husband's presidency. Bushes are incredibly special to Texas A&M, super active, so it's a real loss for our school.
I heard lots of great things about her and the whole Bush family, and so I'm praying for them and hope that they can get over this tough loss.
And we are learning more information tonight now for broadcast to the masses about the funeral. It will be held, we've confirmed, on Saturday here in Houston, but it is a private affair, invite only. But the public, this is important, the public will have a chance to say goodbye and pay their respects here in Houston on Friday. Mrs. Bush will lay in repose from noon until midnight on Friday at the church that they attend here in Houston. You can go to the website with more information on the full list and schedule of activities that will be coming up in the next few days as the world and the country says goodbye to Barbara Bush. Ed?
A lot of people want to be there. Casey, we appreciate you bringing us that fresh information tonight.
Yes.
Condolences pouring in tonight, as Casey noted, as the nation and the world mourn the loss of former First Lady Barbara Bush. President Trump and First Lady Melania Trump remembering her legacy by noting amongst her greatest achievements was recognizing the importance of literacy, as we just noted, as a fundamental family value that requires nurturing and protection. She will be long remembered, the couple says, for her strong devotion to country and family, both of which she served unfailingly well. The Senate Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer, tweeting, "Mrs. Bush personified grace and class as First Lady and throughout her life. She will be missed, and I send my heartfelt condolences to the Bush family." While House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi said Mrs. Bush brought dignity, civility, and spirit to everything she did. Her strength of character, the strength of her principles, and the strength of her faith were a great gift to our nation. And former President Bill Clinton, who got very close to the Bushes after that election battle, tweeted that Barbara Bush was a remarkable woman. She had grit and grace, brains and beauty. She was fierce and feisty in support of her family and friends, her country, and her causes. She showed us what an honest, vibrant, full life looks like. Hillary and I mourn her passing and bless her memory. Well, Brad Blakeman is a former deputy assistant to President George W. Bush. He's somebody who knew the Bush family and still knows the Bush family quite well, and we appreciate on a difficult night, Brad, you coming in. What pops out for you, first of all, about Mrs. Bush right off the bat?
She's a consummate First Lady. She would tell you, I think, don't mourn me, celebrate me. I'm the luckiest person in the world. I found the love of my life at a very early age. We stayed together for 73 years. I was blessed to have a great family and friends, and I lived in the best country in the world, and I served the greatest nation. That's what we should remember about Mrs. Bush. She was somebody of class and of dignity who cared about people. It was never about her. It was always about others.
And did she talk about, Casey just reported that she will eventually be buried next to Robin, the daughter that the Bushes buried at such an early age, I believe 3 years old because of leukemia. Did she talk openly about that? Did the family talk about it? I know it was devastating, and yet they really tried to keep her memory and that legacy alive.
I've only heard them speak very not too often about Robin, but when they did, it was heartfelt. And every time I heard them publicly talk about Robin, the grief really almost overcame them. It was a loss they never got over. You can never get over the loss of a child.
Yeah, and Brad, on a more positive note, since we're friends on Facebook, I heard this story already, but I want to share it with our audience. You were a young staffer for the Bushes, and Mrs. Bush was upset at you.
She was, and she was like your mom. When you did something wrong, she let you have it, and when you did something right, she praised you. But I was a young staffer. I was in charge of then President Bush's trip to the UN General Assembly in New York in October of 1990, and it was raining cats and dogs, and I was running around. But I knew that I had to get to the motorcade. So I jumped in the elevator with President and Mrs. Bush. I didn't have my raincoat. Everybody else had a raincoat. And Mrs. Bush looked at me and said, "Brad, where's your raincoat?" I said, "Miss Bush, I was running around. I didn't have time." And she said, "Well, that wasn't very smart." She said, "Now what you need to do is go back up and get it, and the president and I will wait in the car." So I went up in the elevator. It seemed like a lifetime, got my coat, came back, and as I'm going past the limousine, she smiles and nods her approval. And when we get to the UN, as she passes me, she turns to me and said, "Now you're smart and dry." So, I mean, she was everybody's mom.
Yeah, absolutely. And you've got an entire motorcade waiting downstairs, I believe, at the Waldorf Astoria for Brad Blakeman to get a raincoat. But she had that mom instinct, no doubt about it. Brad, we appreciate your insights tonight.
Thank you so much.
Breaking news ahead, sanctions or no sanctions. Haley versus Kudlow, a battle of words within the Trump administration on whether more Russian sanctions are coming or not. And more breaking news next. President Trump at Mar-a-Lago with Japan's Prime Minister Abe talking trade and North Korea amid confirmation of maybe a breakthrough with the Hermit Kingdom. John Roberts is next with a big story breaking tonight.
We didn't have a homeowner's claim last year, so Allstate's giving us money back on our bill.
Seems fair. Didn't use it.
Wish we got money back on gym memberships.
Get money back.
Hilarious.
With claim-free rewards. Switching to Allstate is worth it.
They're getting more out of life by starting with Miracle-Gro, potting mix and plant food. Together guaranteed to produce 3 times the harvest. More to enjoy, to share. 3 times the harvest.
Would be early June. Tonight at Mar-a-Lago, the president was asked several times about a statement that he made earlier in the day that there had been talks at the highest levels between the United States and North Korea. There was some speculation that maybe President Trump was working the phones talking to Kim Jong-un. The White House clarified to say, no, it wasn't the president, but talks had been taking place at very, very high levels in the administration. And now we learn it, in fact, was the CIA director, Mike Pompeo, who was engaged in those direct sit-down one-on-one talks with Kim Jong-un. We had heard several weeks ago that the intelligence community was going to take the lead on setting up this summit with the presidents. We did not know, though, that Mike Pompeo was actually going to get in an aircraft and travel all the way to North Korea. This revelation about Pompeo's trip happens on the same day that South Korea announced that it and North Korea are working on a peace accord that they may sign as early as the April 27th meeting. meeting between Moon Jae-in, the president of South Korea, and Kim Jong-un when they meet in Panmunjom may not happen quite that quickly, but this would be a peace agreement that would supersede the ceasefire, the armistice that has been in place for 65 years. The planned meeting between President Trump and North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is giving Japan heartburn. Shinzo Abe seeking assurances from the president that Japanese interests won't be given short shrift.
For North Korean issue, I'd like to underscore the importance of achieving the complete, verifiable, and irreversible denuclearization, as well as the abandonment of missile programs of North Korea.
President Trump tried to calm those fears today, saying he will faithfully represent Japan's interests if and when he sits down with Kim.
They do respect us. We are respectful of them, and we're going to see what happens. We will bring up the abductees. We'll bring up many different things. I think it's a time for talking.
But Prime Minister Abe may hear less comforting talk when it comes to trade. President Trump is taking aim at the $69 billion trade deficit the U.S. has with Japan. On the traditional friendship walk tonight, President Trump said trade is high on the agenda at Mar-a-Lago.
We're getting a lot of things done. A lot of great things between our two countries. So thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Have you guys discussed extensions to the steel and aluminum tariffs yet? Is that something that you're willing to do?
We will be discussing it, yes.
Japan wants to see the U.S. back in the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but President Trump wants to negotiate a bilateral free trade deal with Japan first. The president tweeting last week that the U.S. already has bilateral deals with 6 of the 11 nations in TPP and are working to make a deal with the biggest of those nations, Japan, who has hit us hard on trade for years.
He's not a big fan of these multilateral agreements. He'd rather go country to country, so-called bilateral, like we're going to talk with Japan tomorrow, or today and tomorrow. So we'll see about this.
There is concern in Japan that the president may link trade with security issues, saying basically to Shinzo Abe, look, if you want some guarantees with North Korea during our talks on them getting rid of their intermediate range ballistic missiles, which you are so worried about, well, you've got to give a little bit on trade. Now, back to this meeting and the trip that Mike Pompeo made to Pyongyang. The president has been very optimistic in the wake of that meeting about the possibility of a meeting with Kim Jong-un. And today he revealed, Ed, that they have whittled it down to 5 possible locations for those two leaders to meet, though the president would not tip his hand as to what those locations were. But I'm told it's possible one of them could be Singapore or Hanoi, Vietnam. We'll find out soon. Ed?
News conference tomorrow. Suspect there'll be a lot of questions. John Roberts live for us tonight in Florida. Thank you, John. A war of words, meanwhile, tonight involving possible further sanctions against Russia. But the Kremlin's not the one firing back. For more, we go to our State Department correspondent who's live with us tonight, Rich Edson. Good to see you, Rich.
Hey, good to see you too, Ed. And, the administration has steadily punished Russia over the past month. Sanctions, expelling diplomats, and then an assumption that officials would announce more sanctions yesterday. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, said this weekend that the administration would announce new sanctions against Russian companies that are involved with equipment related to the Assad regime's chemical weapons used in Syria. Monday came. It went, no sanctions. That led to confusion as to whether the president had decided or the administration changed course and never told its UN ambassador, its most public foreign policy figure with no confirmed Secretary of State. The White House's top economic advisor then said the UN ambassador was simply mistaken.
We have a set of sanctions, and additional sanctions are under consideration but not been determined. She got ahead of the curve. She's done a great job. She's a very effective ambassador. There might have been some momentary confusion about that.
Then Ambassador Haley told Fox's Dana Perino, quote, "With all due respect, I don't get confused." A senior administration official said that the senior economic advisor, Larry Kudlow, called Nikki Haley to apologize for this. As for whether the administration will impose additional sanctions, the State Department says it is a possibility.
Sanctions are not off the table. I want to be clear about that. Sanctions are not off the table. We just don't have anything to announce at this time.
Meanwhile, Russian legislators are considering sanctioning American businesses in response to a previous round of U.S. sanctions against Russians.
No confusion from Rich Edson tonight. Rich,
Thanks.
Appreciate it. An immigration showdown, meanwhile, in California.
the state's second largest county, voting on whether to remain a sanctuary city. The votes are tallied. The results coming up next.
There are those who panic when the market makes a move. But if you're like us, you know that focus and the drive to do more will take you places you've only dreamt of. We are Athene, and we are driven to do more.
Before discovering Nexium 24-Hour to treat her frequent heartburn, Claire could only imagine enjoying chocolate cake. Now she can have her cake and eat it too. Nexium 24-Hour stops acid before it starts for all day, all night protection. Can you imagine 24 hours without heartburn?
Largest counties in California have voted to back the Trump administration's lawsuit against California's sanctuary law. Unlike Orange County, which last month filed to join the federal lawsuit, today San Diego County voted to support the federal lawsuit by filing a friend of the court brief. Remember, San Diego is right along the U.S.-Mexico border, which would indicate a push for stricter enforcement in a very key area. During the county supervisors meeting today, where both sides showed up to protest, Supervisor Kristen Gaspar showed a stack of emails in support of the sanctuary law and a stack opposing the law. The stack opposing was about 15 times as high. Supervisor Diane Jacobs says it is all about safety. Watch.
We're talking about people who are crossing the border illegally, coming into this county and committing a crime, then being let loose and probably to commit another crime again.
So now 2 counties and 9 cities have voted in some capacity to push back against California's sanctuary law. And the city of Los Alamitos, which started the anti-sanctuary movement, has now voted to officially opt out and exempt its 12,000 residents from the sanctuary law. Today at the National Press Club, Governor Jerry Brown said this. Watch.
They're human beings. They have families. It's very important that they be integrated in a humane, intelligent way. But instead, it's just an inflammatory football that very low-life politicians like to exploit. And I think it's shocking, it's despicable, and is harmful to California, mostly to the people.
Governor Brown also said despite recent battles, he still thinks there is common ground for California to work with the federal government. 2 weeks ago, President Trump lashed out at the governor for pardoning 5 criminal illegal immigrants facing deportation, including drug dealers, a robber, and a man who badly beat his wife. Of the nation's 11 million plus illegal immigrants, about 27%, or 3 million, live in California. Ed.
Seem to remember the president calling him Governor Moonbeam. Trace Gallagher, good to see you tonight. Yes. We mentioned the governor of the Golden State. He came right here to Washington today amid his battle with President Trump over what California's National Guard troops will enforce at the Mexican border. Tonight, Kristen Fisher reports live on the rift and whether it can be repaired. Good evening, Kristen.
Hey, good evening, Ed. So here's the deal. The California governor has agreed to send the state's National Guard to the border, but there's a catch, and it's a big one. He won't allow them to be used for immigration enforcement. So they can help with stopping human traffickers and gun and drug smugglers, but they cannot help stop illegal immigrants, which, of course, for President Trump, defeats the whole purpose.
Just minutes before the governor of California took the mic today in Washington, President Trump ripped into him on Twitter by saying, looks like Jerry Brown and California are not looking for safety and security along their very porous border. He cannot come to terms for the National Guard to patrol and protect the border. The high crime rate will only get higher. But Governor Brown fired back by saying he believes that this deployment will make a difference, even if the troops do not help implement the White House's immigration policies.
Trying to stop drug smuggling, human trafficking, and guns going to Mexico to the cartels, that sounds to me like fighting crime. Trying to catch some desperate mothers and children or unaccompanied minors coming from Central America, that sounds like something else.
Governor Brown has agreed to deploy as many as 400 guardsmen to the southern border. That prompted President Trump to thank him in a tweet last week.
We want to be cooperative. I appreciate the president's tweet when he thanked me.
Yet the governor said today that his letter to the Homeland Security Secretary still stands. Quote, this will not be a mission to build a new wall. It will not be a mission to round up women and children or detain people escaping violence and seeking a better life. But in Texas, National Guard troops are already complying with the Trump administration's request by conducting air and ground surveillance, while troops in New Mexico and Arizona are offering air and ground support. As for California,
the Guard is chomping at the bit, ready to go.
Chomping at the bit and ready to go, but only according to the governor's terms and not the president's, Ed.
All right, Kristen, appreciate your reporting tonight. The sanctuary state movement in California is reeling a bit tonight. San Diego's all-Republican Board of Supervisors voted 3-1 in favor of directing the county's attorney to file a brief in support of the federal lawsuit, the one pushed by the Trump administration, against California's sanctuary policy. Joining us live from California, the chairwoman of the San Diego Board of Supervisors, Kristen Gaspar, who's also running to succeed retiring GOP Congressman Darrell Issa. Good evening. It's good to have you.
Good evening. It's great to be here.
Talk about the significance of what happened today in San Diego.
It was a big day for San Diego. Today marked the day that we sent a clear message to Governor Brown. Enough is enough. In San Diego, we're committed to putting our public safety first. And unfortunately, Governor Brown's clear violation of the U.S. Constitution has put San Diegans at risk. The board voted today to move forward to file that amicus brief. It's a significant day. I showed viewers this morning the piles of emails that just poured into the county in support of what we're doing. I want to show you an updated visual today of what those emails look like by this evening. It's really quite remarkable. The number of email communications that we've received, people saying, we support what you're doing, County of San Diego.
It almost looks like the old style telegrams that are piling up. They're electronic, but you're putting them out to give us a sense of it. We appreciate it, Chairwoman. But we mentioned Governor Brown, and earlier he had this to say to sort of push back on what you're doing. Take a listen.
The fact is, America has 10 to 11 million people that are here, and they're human beings. They have families. It's very important that they be integrated in a humane, intelligent way. But instead, it's just an inflammatory football that very low-life politicians like to exploit.
Chairwoman, low-life politician?
We have 3.5 million San Diegans to protect. There's a lot at stake. SB 54 didn't make our community more safe. It made our communities less safe. Just by way of example, under Governor Brown's SB 54, between 1 and 3 inmates walk away freely each and every day in San Diego. Since January alone, 284 inmates have just been released back onto the streets without any communication to immigration authorities whatsoever. And now immigration authorities have to go out into our communities and seek out these criminals for potential deportation. Our communities are less safe under Governor Brown's model. We don't have the ability to collaborate at the local, the state, the federal level. This is harmful to the 3.5 million San Diegans.
It's a huge problem. I want to note that Governor Brown didn't just go after you and other politicians. He attacked Fox News today and said we're exploiting this issue. So I want to ask you, I've only got 30 seconds. He says that it's going to disrupt your state's economy because you have people who have been here 5, 10, 15 years. They're part of the economy, and now you want to deport them, and it's going to be disruptive. You say?
Governor Brown is mixing the issues. SB 54, we're talking about people who came illegally into our country and committed crimes. These are people that we need to keep an eye on. These are people that are eligible for deportation. These are not safe people back out in our community.
All right. Chairwoman Kristen Gaspar, we appreciate you coming in tonight.
Thank you.
All right, brace yourself, coffee lovers. Starbucks is closing thousands of stores. But hang on. The chain is just going to do that sort of temporarily. Are they going too far amid political backlash? We'll tell you. Plus, our panel weighs in on Stormy Daniels making the round. She was on The View, but this time she was challenged for being an alleged publicity hound. Wait till you see what happened.
Yes, there's a lot of publicity, but I didn't do it for that because this isn't what I want to be known for.
With menopause, I expected hot flashes. But struggling to zip my jeans? I'm not ready for elastic waistbands.
Only Estroven Weight Management helps safely manage weight and relieves hot flashes. Safe, trusted Estroven. Do you need the most trusted battery in your noise-canceling headphones? Maybe not. Maybe you could trust you won't be next to a loud eater. Or you could just trust Duracell.
We're sitting at Starbucks in Philadelphia. They weren't ordering anything. I think one of them tried to use the bathroom. People started calling the police. They were essentially arrested. There was a lot of frustration about this. Starbucks comes out with a statement today. The CEO says, quote, "I've spent the last few days in Philly with my leadership team listening to the community, learning what we did wrong and the steps we need to take to fix it. While this is not limited to Starbucks, we're committed to being a part of the solution. Closing our stores for racial bias training is just one step in a journey that requires dedication from every level of our company and partnerships in our local communities." This is a good first step.
It's absolutely a good first step, and I think hopefully other companies will take this same first step, because unconscious bias is something that we deal with every day in our society. And what happened in this particular case is these two individuals were waiting for a meeting, as many of us do, at their local Starbucks, and instead of, reaching out and finding why they were there, this particular Starbucks clerk or manager decided to call the police on them. And instead of the police asking why they were there, the police chose to arrest them because they were waiting for their meeting, which is something that we've all done on this panel. And I think Starbucks is moving in the right direction. Hopefully other companies will join them, because unconscious bias is a problem. And it starts by looking in the mirror and figuring out, do I have unconscious bias, and what can I do to correct that?
Guy, what do you think about this bias training?
Well, I agree with the second part of what Richard said. It was the right thing for Starbucks to try to correct the situation that happened at this particular store. And the CEO, for example, met with the men who were improperly arrested. I don't think it was handled well at all in that instance. But does that justify a nationwide closing of basically the entire chain to get the entire workforce at Starbucks into this diversity training program, when this was a bad call by one employee at one store out of 8,000? That seems like a little bit of overkill to me, overcompensation for, yes, a bad decision in one location.
Sagar, I want to turn you to another story we've been talking about, which is Stormy Daniels, and she's sort of on this publicity tour. A lot of people on the president's side of this are getting frustrated with that, and when she went to The View, I think she might have gotten a more hostile reception than she was expecting. Watch.
Yesterday, because you didn't have anything to do with the case, it seemed a little like you were just trying to get attention, which I understand that you're being sued by our president, but it does seem like you're benefiting a lot.
We had every right to be there, and Judge Wood, the sitting federal judge, would not have granted me access to address the court if we had no business being there.
Yes, I've gotten more bookings than usual, but I'm doing the job that I've been doing for the last almost 20 years.
Sagar, 15 minutes up pretty soon, or no?
Oh, well, I think she's going to be going for quite some time. I know she's got a booking with several months at strip clubs, including here in D.C. But what I've heard here is that Stormy Daniels did hear that message very loud and clear, because she actually donated the $130,000 that she received from her NDA to Planned Parenthood. And she actually donated a part of that money to the organization in the president's name. Many people are saying that that is because of the hostile reception that she received from Meghan McCain on The View this morning.
Guy?
Look, Meghan McCain is a colleague of ours for quite a while at Fox, and she's over at The View, and she's crushing it. She's asking these tough questions that aren't being asked of people. Look, it is not a mystery that Stormy Daniels is out there trying to get attention. Obviously she is. Look at her lawyer. Her lawyer will be beating down the door of any television studio that will have him for weeks on end. It's part of their strategy.
Richard?
To me, politically, there's a poll that just came out. The American people believe Stormy Daniels. They also believe it's not that big of a story.
Richard, I got 10 seconds
I don't
for
know
you.
where
Last
this goes.
Listen, the only reason why Stormy Daniels is allowed to get this attention is because the president decided to sign a non-disclosure agreement with her, and he decided to sleep with a porn star. That's why we're here talking about this. So if he didn't decide to sleep with a porn star, we wouldn't be here.
All right.
Well, the NDA says different.
Well, they say it was because it was going to, even a false story was going to be damaging. All of you gentlemen, appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having
me. All right. Meanwhile,
thanks, Ed.
Horror in the sky. A flyer's worst nightmare becomes a reality. Those stories when we return. Talk about this emergency landing.
With Esurance Photo Claims, you could have money for repairs within a day.
Wow, that was really fast.
That's insurance for the modern world. Esurance. Click or call.
This is where life expresses itself as an endless flow of energy. Are you ready? Atlantis. Bahamas at heart.
Book by April 30th for summer savings at 1-800-Atlantis or AtlantisBahamas.com.